Heather Knight is the news columnist that every city needs. She's one who really loves the city, or at least it would seem so. She covers everything from politics to homelessness to family flight and the quirks of living in one of the most fascinating cities in the world. Heather believes in holding politicians accountable and telling the stories of real people and their struggles. And she co-hosts the Chronicle's flagship daily podcast, which I just heard today and I really found quite interesting, Fifth and Mission, and co-founded its program Total SF to celebrate the wonder and whimsy of San Francisco. She's won numerous awards. I'm not going to mention them all. You can read about them, including top California columnist in 2020 from the California Newspaper Publishers Association. If you follow her Twitter feed, and you should, you will realize how lucky we are she made time for us today. Heather is being interviewed today with my esteemed colleague, Sarah Segal of Greenbrier Segal, who is a fellow PR Roundtable member and board member. Sarah began her communication career in journalism and worked on the production teams of CBS and NBC News, then in-house for both public and private companies before moving agency side. She's advised tech startups with the Blue Shirt, make sure I get this right, the Blue Shirt Group before joining Shift Communications. 2018, she launched her own consumer agency, Segal Communications, which was acquired in January of this year by the Messina Group to create Greenbrier Segal. So take it away, Sarah, and welcome Heather Knight to the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Heather, I've been looking very much forward to this conversation. I have a feeling that we're going to have more questions than time. So thank you for participating in this. And I think the best way to kind of start out with is, how did you end up being a columnist? Like, what brought you to the San Francisco Chronicle? You've been there for, what, 11 years, I believe?
Longer than that. 22 years.
Story.
Yeah, I got a job at the Chronicle right out of college when I was 22. And so I've been there for quite some time. And I was a reporter for most of that time and became a columnist about 4 years ago. When City Hall is open, I usually sit in the press room there and write out of City Hall, and was covering city politics, and then was promoted to columnist about 4 years ago, and cover a lot of politics still, but also fun stuff too, so I can kind of mix it up.
For people that aren't, I know that I have a strong understanding of the difference between a reporter and a columnist, but it might be beneficial for the group to, how do you define that? Like, what is the difference?
So a reporter is usually on one beat that they cover, be it the Giants or the mayor or whatever it is, and they have to write objectively and not take sides and just be, very factual. And a columnist gets to choose to write about anything. I love that I get to pick my topics, and as long as it relates to the city. So that kind of is endless in terms of possibilities. But I also get to include my opinion and try to affect change. So oftentimes if I highlight something that's not working at City Hall and be pretty blunt about it, then politicians will hopefully take that as a cue to do the right thing. So that's one of my main goals with a column, is to show what's not working and to have an opinion about it and explain what could work better.
Was that a tough transition for you to go from having an opinion and not having an opinion to having that kind of impartial nature to actually having an opinion?
Yeah. And it was like everything at a newspaper is so fast and you just jump into the next job. So nobody really taught me how to do this. It was just like, okay, now you're a columnist. So it was a difficult transition in terms of just getting the hang of, oh, I'm supposed to say what I think now. That was definitely different. But now I really love that role because I feel like I can have a lot more impact than I did as a reporter.
Before you became a columnist, is that something that you strived, like you wanted, like you grew up reading other columnists, you wanted to do that? Or was it something that you discovered while you were in the newsroom as having kind of that freedom to form an opinion to, bring to light issue?
I never had this as a goal. And I was just tapped when the previous columnist for San Francisco retired. So it was just sort of happenstance. And I came to love the job, but it wasn't like an aspiration of mine.
I think it's a fantastic job. Now, your column runs, 2 times a week? Is that right?
Yes, Wednesdays and Sundays in print. Often the Sunday one is out online earlier. So yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you find stories to include, and kind of what are the things that you need to check off in your mind to be worthy of a column and talking about?
Mhm. Just living here and doing all the things that all San Franciscans do is the main thing. Just writing muni, dealing with city hall politics as a person who lives here, dealing with the schools and raising kids and owning a home and God forbid trying to get a permit to do anything on it. Everything that I go through as a regular person living here informs my columns, but also I get tons of tips from readers. So sometimes my email inbox is a little out of control, but that's usually a good thing because so many people say, this happened to me the other day, or I saw this, or I took this picture I thought was interesting. And they're just sharing stuff with me all the time that proves really useful. I also develop sources at City Hall like any regular reporter would, who give me tips and scoops. And so all that added up together usually gives me more ideas than I could ever actually write. One of my favorite all-time examples of a reader who gave me a really great entry into a column was a woman who lives on Lombard Street, right above the curvy part, emailed me because she was really frustrated with how many car break-ins were happening on her block, and people would call 911 and the cops could never get there in time and kind of didn't even bother responding a lot of the time. And these poor tourists who are spending so much money to come visit San Francisco would often end up having all their luggage stolen, their passports were gone, money gone. And so it's a terrible experience. And then you go home from a trip and you might tell 2 people if you had a great time, but if something horrible happened to you, you'll probably tell like 50. And so it just was, this resident was just so frustrated. And so she said, I'll show you what's happening. Come to my home. And so I went with a photographer. I was so glad that I brought a photographer with me. Sometimes we go at different times, just depending on schedules. So we're chatting with some construction guys who are working on her home. And they were saying, yeah, we've been working on her house for months and we've seen so many car break-ins. We warn people, but this happens in 5 seconds. And then the construction guy goes, look there, that car looks suspicious. So we started watching this car with paper plates and a very boring color. It was like white or beige or something, very nondescript. And as we were talking, it circled and circled and circled. And then we saw right in front of us, this guy jump out of the car, smash a window of a tourist rental vehicle, get a backpack, jump in the car and zoom off. And that thing took literally 5 seconds. And luckily the photographer had his camera ready and got these amazing shots of the crime happening right in front of us that ran on the front page. And the police were able to identify him because the picture was so clear, and he was arrested.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
Yeah. And that was all because a reader emailed me.
What kind of, when somebody, if there's somebody in this group that has a tip for you, are there certain things that are very helpful for you when you do get that kind of outreach? Do you prefer to have, a contact? I'm sure some people don't want to provide their names or information too.
I think as clear as you can be, and if you're willing to go on the record, that's always much better. I'm happy to get anything from readers. I try to read all of my email and respond to as much as I can, but the clearer, the better. I saw a tent on my sidewalk, but I don't want to talk to you or tell you any more than that is not particularly helpful. Whereas this woman, come to this house, this address, I will be there. This is my name. That's very helpful.
How outside of regular folks contacting you, how do you work with PR people? Are you pitched by them? What is your relationship with PR?
Yeah, they're not a huge part of how I pick my stories, but they do help. I saw David Perry, he was on here. He gave me a great idea a few weeks ago, which was that the hotel industry, which he represents, is in dire straits now with so few tourists coming. And so that was sort of interesting, but not as interesting as what we came up together, which was I said, well, could I go to one of these empty famous hotels that's just sitting there waiting for people to come back? And so he coordinated a great story, which was the manager of the St. Francis met me, and we got to go explore this basically ghost town 100-year-old hotel together. They haven't closed at all during the pandemic, but they're not getting very many customers yet. So it was really cool to go into this famous giant hotel on Union Square and kind of have my run of it with a photographer, and that was credit to David. So it can be very helpful, but I always recommend thinking of a creative way to get the news across rather than like hotel occupancy is down this percentage. I probably wouldn't do much with that. But if you can think of a creative way to explore that as a column, then that can be really helpful.
Like an experience, like come and we'll show and tell you what's going on. That's an interesting tip. How do you plan for your stories? Do you plan them in advance? I mean, you're obviously very topical with the content that you create. Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you plan that out?
Yeah, I always have like a million things in the hopper at once. I multitask, as I know a lot of you were saying that you do when you introduce yourselves. And so the one complicated thing, a difference between a columnist and a reporter is that mine run on set days. And so I always have to have something for Wednesday and Sunday. So somebody calling me like on a Monday saying I have this amazing story, but it has to run tomorrow wouldn't really fit with my schedule. So that's something I have to consider also. But just always plugging away on as many threads as I can follow at the same time. And then whatever kind of happens first or is the most topical, we'll get the next slot.
So how many stories are you working on at once usually?
Probably at least 5, maybe more, 8. It's a lot. Plus with the podcasting, it makes for busy days.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about like the stories? Like, do you have any favorite stories that you've done in the last year, I want to say, during the pandemic?
Well, there's a lot of really sad ones, of course, but to keep things happy, one of my favorite ones last year, I tried to, every newspaper in 2020, it was pretty much just like you kind of wanted to just curl up in a ball after you read it. But I tried to mix in some happy stuff too. And so, and to focus on the fact that our city still, even though it was so quiet and still is quieter than usual, was still like an amazing place to be in a lot of ways. And one thing that really captured my attention was that neighbors who were sheltering in place were entertaining each other with music. That was a thing that we heard about happening in Italy and elsewhere too. And so I got a tip from a reader that her neighbor, a bagpiper named Hal Wilkes, was going up onto the roof of their apartment building in the Castro every night at sunset to play one bagpipe song. He said, with bagpipes, it's like Tabasco sauce, a little bit goes a long way. So he didn't play more than one, but every night for 111 nights he serenaded his neighbors with bagpipes at sunset. And so I heard about this very early on, I think last March, from his neighbor, and I got to go up on his roof and watch this, and went with a photographer who did a video and photos. And then he told me a few months later, when he had promised he would do it every night in the pandemic, but nobody knew at the time how long this would drag on. And he's like, I cannot keep doing this every night. So he ended it at 111 in a row. So I got to see the last one and wrote about it again. And then he still plays on special occasions and on every Sunday. And so he actually invited me last night to go to the roof again to see him play some Irish songs for St. Patrick's Day. So that was really fun. And it's this amazing setting in front of Sutro Tower and all the lights of the city. And I got to be up there. That was the 3rd time last night. So I love meeting unique people through my job that I can keep in touch with and kind of develop friendships with.
So you have the lighter stories like that, but then you do a lot of coverage of the less light, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. Homelessness, drug issues in the city. How does that take a toll on you at all, covering that kind of content?
Not a personal toll, I don't think, because I'm pretty able to separate my personal life and my professional life. And I'm a pretty optimistic, happy person by nature. But I think the biggest issue besides the virus right now is the drug overdoses that have hit San Francisco so hard that we're losing 2 people every day to overdose deaths, mostly from fentanyl, because it's so deadly. I learned that the amount of fentanyl that's the size of an aspirin is enough to kill 8 people. So just tiny traces are deadly. And what I get just so frustrated by is how open the selling is. Like I know exactly how to buy it, which is crazy. You just go to Golden Gate and hide, and dealers are there all day. They take shifts, and you just buy it, and then you can see people at their feet who are their clients just sprawled on the sidewalk, passed out. And everyone knows this, but the city does so little about it. There's some arrests, but the DA usually releases them to await trial or on probation, and they go back to the same corner. And so I've been writing a lot about that. And I try to find real people to tell that story. So last year I profiled a woman in the Castro who was addicted to fentanyl who died, and she was famous in the neighborhood for wearing 2 buns. Her hair was long with 2 buns like Princess Leia, so she was called Princess Leia, and she was known for walking into traffic, and people would almost hit her all the time, and people would call 911, and the city didn't really do anything about it because she would reject offers of help, and then she ended up dying of a fentanyl overdose in December.
I mean, you're covering this, and you've said a couple times that the city doesn't do much. What should they do?
I think we need stronger prosecution. I don't understand why you don't get jail time for selling a product that's illegal and can easily cause somebody's death and is causing 2 deaths every day in the city now. That's just kind of crazy to me. And I also think we need much more treatment. It should be, right now it's literally easier to buy fentanyl than to access drug treatment. And I think that obviously needs to be reversed. So on both fronts, I think we're not helping users enough and we're not punishing dealers enough.
So I have an office in the city, and when I come in, there's nobody around. So you're really, the homelessness is much more apparent these days, at least from my perspective. Do you think that the city has done enough to address that issue, especially during COVID?
I think it's good that they have put so many people in hotel rooms, which were empty anyway, so the hotels can make some money and the people get their own rooms with bathrooms and meals provided. And the city's been able to buy 2 of those hotels to turn them into permanent supportive housing. And I know there's a push to buy more if hotel owners decide they can't make it, and the city could just buy the property from them. So I think that's good. And the safe sleeping sites, I think, have been pretty good. Those are organized tent camps rather than just letting people pitch their tents wherever and not having any hygiene. They are organized camps with security and meals and bathrooms and showers and toiletries and all that. So I think the city has made some progress on that front, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to all those people who have gotten temporary housing after the pandemic's over.
Yeah, the hotels, have you had the opportunity to go in those hotels?
No.
Someone in the chat asked, they say, some of your stories are quite long. Do you negotiate with your editors to get enough column inches to tell the complete story?
Unfortunately, our editor-in-chief has just put firmer inch counts on all of us because he said we all write too long. But so there's not as much leeway as there was. But if I'm working on something bigger, then yeah, you can go over, and just as long as your editors know.
Someone also writes, how often, if at all, does Heather get approached to run for office?
A lot, and I'm not going to.
That's a firm no. Any particular reason why?
I have no interest. It's too many meetings. I hate meetings.
Well, we're glad that you came to our meeting. What do you hope that people get or take away from your columns? What is your hope the outcome is?
A better San Francisco. So to fix the problems, and there are many that are not working, and to also highlight what is working, and to remember what a special place this is and that it's worth fighting for. So
have you seen your columns make change, like have an impact? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, many times. My favorite one was a few years ago. I was writing, this was when Ed Lee was still the mayor, and I one thing I'm kind of known for is picking a subject and just hammering it. Like I've been called by politicians a dog with a bone. And so I was focusing on how poorly paid public school teachers are and how they have such a hard time affording housing in San Francisco. And we got data that showed how poorly paid San Francisco school teachers are compared to school teachers around California, even where housing is much more affordable. And it was like really bad when you compared it. It was like by far the worst here in the city. And so we wrote about that a lot of times, and about how an effort to build teacher housing had been talked about for like 15 years and they made no progress, the school district in the city. And then the key was finding a teacher, a math teacher, who had actually slept in a homeless shelter because she got evicted and couldn't find anywhere else to live. And so when you have a homeless public school teacher working with a master's degree, I mean, that was a really powerful column. And Ed Lee, a few days later, dedicated $44 million to build teacher housing in San Francisco, which is in development now and should be housing teachers soon.
Wow. To talk more about schools, how do you think the school board is doing in terms of its COVID response, and also renaming of schools?
They've given me a lot of fodder. It's almost like shooting fish in a barrel with those folks. But yeah, not well. They've been doing a terrible job. Still no school child in public school is in a classroom. Other cities around the country have brought at least some students back. Chicago, New York City, LA is farther along than we are. I think we're the last of the pack. And what's really scaring parents of older kids is that there's literally no plan for middle school or high school. They're not even committing to opening in the fall. And they have a plan to bring younger kids back in phases starting April 12th, but that's still unclear. And most kids will only get 2 days in person a week. And so parents are just beyond frustrated. There was you may have seen on Twitter, it kind of went viral, a clip from a recent school board meeting where they decided they shouldn't call it learning loss. You know, how kids stuck at home on Zoom for a year it's been proven have really slipped academically, but don't call that learning loss, call that learning change, because they're just changing the way they're learning. So dumb. So meanwhile, they spent a lot of time renaming 44 schools and changing the way you get into Lowell. And I wrote a column about, they have a parent advisory committee, and most of the seats are empty. Like, nobody has time in a pandemic to volunteer to advise the school board. And they only had one applicant who was a white man who's gay. And they decided that he would not be appropriate because he wouldn't diversify the committee, even though they had no men and no gay people. But because he was white and there was slightly too many white people in comparison to how many white students there are, then he couldn't join it. And they talked about him for 2 hours with his face on Zoom, talked about his sexuality and his race and his gender and why it wasn't worthy of being on this committee. And they never asked him a question the entire time about why he wanted to volunteer, or anything about his child's experience in the schools, or anything about himself. He didn't say a word the entire time. So it was crazy. So I wrote about that, and the Daily Show contacted me and said, we would really love to have him come on our show. And so I passed the message along, but unfortunately he didn't want to be on the Daily Show.
Oh, come on, Trevor Noah, that would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Would you, for people that aren't familiar with Total SF, would you share a little bit about what that program, it's not a program, but what that effort is?
Sure. So we have a really great pop culture critic who's one of my good friends named Peter Hartlaub. And 3 years ago, it's kind of a funny story how this all came to be. So I have a little boy who at the time was 4, and he was obsessed with muni buses, and he memorized the entire system from 1 California, 2 Clement, 3 Jackson. He could tell you every single bus all the way up to the 90s and what time they come and where and how to get from point A to point B. And so I tweeted about this because I thought it was so funny. And Peter saw it and said, well, you know, Larry Baer, who is the CEO of the Giants, did this famous day back in the 80s where he rode every muni bus with his friends in one day. You should do that if you really want to impress your kid. And I said, well, only if you do it with me, thinking that would kill the whole idea of it. He said, of course. And so we did this thing we called Total Muni back in 2018, where we rode every bus, cable car, streetcar, train in the entire system in one day. And it took 18 hours. And we ended at the ballpark with Larry Bear, and we got there just in time for the 7th inning stretch and take me out to the ball game. And so that was like an amazing, fun day in San Francisco. And we've continued that with the program we call Total SF. So we have a podcast, and we remade the 49-mile scenic route to make it more bike and walker friendly, and hit more independent bookstores and restaurants and bars and parks. And we've just done lots of kind of fun offbeat things. We decorate cable cars every Christmas in the Chronicle stuff that says extra, extra, read all about it. And we just have fun and try to celebrate like the good stuff about San Francisco.
So you rode each line from starting point to its end point?
No, we just had to be on each one. You could never do all what you're saying in one day, but we just had to go one stop on each one. So
so say some of these folks represent businesses that are on those routes. Are you constantly updating that that adventure?
We had big dreams to do that, and then the pandemic hit, and so then you couldn't really do anything, and most of these businesses were closed. And so we're hoping as the city reawakens that we can come back to that.
Someone asked in the chat whether or not you're whether or not San Francisco is going to make it. What do you think about San Francisco? I was listening to a report yesterday that said that 20% of all business spaces are vacant, and they literally can't give away you can't give away the amount of office space there is available here now. Like, are we going to come back from this?
I think it's a mixed answer, but I'm optimistic. I'm staying here, at least for now. But I think that the city is famous for rebounding. I mean, after every earthquake and every disaster that's hit, we just seem to come back bigger and better. So I'm hoping in a couple of years, this will have been seen as a positive. And I actually think that we've seen a little bit of the bubble pop in the rental market. And so I'm hoping that that continues and doesn't get too crazy again, because I'd really love to see San Francisco become a place where teachers and artists and nonprofit workers and bartenders and just regular people can afford to live here, because I think they provide, so much life and fun to the city. And my colleague Peter, who does the Total SF stuff, has gone into our archives a lot and seen what happened after the 1918 pandemic here. And of course, the Roaring 20s came after that. And he had some great stories about how that was one of the best times in the city. Like, the theaters were packed, the restaurants were packed. People were so eager to just have fun again and see each other again that that businesses flourished. And so I'm hoping we see some of that.
Yeah, no, and especially since they're considering making the parklets that all the restaurants put out permanent. Do you think that that's going to happen?
It did, yeah. The mayor announced it Friday, and she has enough support from supervisors that that's pretty much a done deal. And so I think that's really neat. I've always wondered why we didn't have more outdoor dining and more of a European flavor in terms of plazas where people are outside. And so I think that that has been kind of a silver lining.
Are there any local or national writers that you admire that you think are worth checking out for anybody who follows your work?
Well, of course, you should all subscribe to the San Francisco Chronicle. We have more great writers than I could ever list, but a lot to explore there every day. I really like Joe Eskenazi at Mission Local. He covers a lot of the same turf as I do in terms of politics. But he had an amazing piece that I shared on Twitter about the school board's renaming of 44 schools. That is hilarious. They declined to talk to any historians for this effort, and they just decided that they themselves knew best when it came to, like, say, whether Abraham Lincoln was worthy of having a school named after him, which they decided he is not. But Joe wrote a funny piece where he actually talked to historians, unlike the school board, and the things that they had to say about this effort was pretty memorable.
You work from home, correct? Have you always worked from home, or did you go in the newsroom?
No, I usually am in the press room at City Hall, but sometimes in the newsroom at 5th and Mission. Both of those are closed now. I'm still going out to interview people in a safe way, distance and masked, but I do my writing and interviewing on the phone from home.
Do you think that they'll stay that way even after the we've hit herd immunity. I heard that our infection rate for the Bay Area is at 1% now.
Yeah, we're doing a great job. We'll be in the orange tier next week, and then the yellow tier almost certainly 3 weeks later. We could actually be advancing faster, but the state requires you to be in each color tier for 3 weeks just to make sure things don't get too crazy again. So we're definitely heading in the right direction. Last time I looked, only 1% of coronavirus tests in the city are coming back positive. And every person who gets it is only infecting 0.66 other people. You want that number to be below 1. That means the virus is losing steam. If you're infecting more than one person and they're all infecting more than one person, then it can become out of control. So all the signs are good. But no, I don't want to work from home forever. I like interacting with my sources and my colleagues, and I'm hopeful that, I think the good thing is that bosses will be more flexible. Like, I think, maybe being in the office 3 days a week and home 2 days a week or something like that would be ideal. But I think that bosses have learned that people can get work done on flexible schedules and from home. So hopefully that will be around for a while.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Molly, who has been watching the chat channel to make sure I haven't missed anything. Molly, are there any questions that I wasn't able to see?
There were a few, but I think there are two, I guess. One is, do you think the school board, will be recalled? How will that go? And how do you remain so optimistic? There's a lot that's not great, but you seem to really, engage it all.
Yeah. The first one, I don't know, like no San Francisco elected official has been recalled in 40 years or something. And so it's always a long shot. Even though we like to think as voters that we are very savvy in terms of picking the best candidates, we almost always just go with the incumbents. And we definitely don't do our homework on the school board elections. But there is an effort now, and I think signature gathering will start in the next few weeks. But even if it does qualify, it probably wouldn't make the ballot until next year. This is a really long process. So if kids are back in school and things have gotten back to normal, people might forget about this. But if it hasn't, I could definitely see them getting recalled. And then how do I stay optimistic? I'm just an optimistic person by nature. And I have great kids and a great husband who you probably saw walking behind me. And I am able to focus on how lucky I am to have a job and that my family's healthy and I haven't lost anyone to COVID. And so there's a lot to be happy about too.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. We really, really appreciate you coming. And I guess the only other last question is just that if we try to reach you, email is best and we should be really brief, right?
Yeah, hnight@sfchronicle.com. I'd be happy to hear from any of you. You can follow me on Twitter at hnightsf or on Instagram at heatherknightsf. I can be reached both of those places to direct messaging. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Sarah. So it's now my pleasure to name the winners of our 2 books. And we have a 3rd book now. David Perry is offering Upon this Rock. And I'm going to get to name the people. So Hattie Hamlin, you get David Perry's book. Okay, write that down. And the Seth Godin book, The Practice, Shipping Creative Work by Seth Godin, will be Brianna Miller.
Yay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's Seth. Gotta make sure we get this right. And the 3rd book, which is my personal favorite, right, and it's called An Effort to Understand by David Murray, and the subtitle is Hearing One Another and Ourselves in a Nation Cracked in Half. I think it's very interesting reading. And the person will be Ellen Newman. Ellen Newman. Okay, all righty. Great, okay. So Jay, is there any information we can impart about our late April meeting, or shall I just sort of say what I know?
So we usually hold our our scholarship luncheon in April, which is when we award scholarships to outstanding PR, marketing, and related fields students in the Bay Area. It will be in the last week of April. That's all I know right now, but we will be co-hosting it with Golden Gate University, and it will feature a panel on applying the lessons that we hopefully learned during 2020 as we go into 2021. And it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. I will be on the panel. That's not just why it's going to be awesome, but it is a reason. But yeah, keep your calendars clear. And yeah, keep an eye out for an email from us announcing dates, times, and all that good stuff as we finalize it.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, we'll be letting you know more about that. Special thanks today to our generous scholarship donors who include Hattie Hamlin, Sandra Stewart, and John McDowell. We're in the process of reviewing applications now for our 2021 scholarship applicants, so stay tuned for that news. And I think that's it. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please watch for our survey in your mailbox. Let us know how we're doing, and watch for the recap on our website. See you soon and stay safe. Thank you.